Okay, we are live streaming on Facebook and we are recording for subsequent posting on YouTube. So that means we're ready to go. Gary, welcome once again.
Hi, Dave.
Thank you for squeezing us in your busy Sabbaths. What were you discussing this morning in your Sabbath school?
Sabbath rest.
Of all things, is the quarterly on Sabbath rest?
That seemed to be today's focus at any rate.
The whole quarterly is on Sabbath.
Yeah, I'm speaking only about what we're on today.
Okay, all right. One second here, I need to do that. Okay, did you have an opening statement you wanted to make?
Not really. I mean, I think these sessions have, gone very well when driven by conversation resulting from questions.
Okay, here we go. What does one mean by academic freedom?
Well, so in the broad sense, I think academic freedom is the freedom of faculty members and students, and in relevant contexts, staff members, to function as self-determining members of the academic community. And so with faculty members, that might range from designing classes to determining lecture contents, and of course then also to the contributions they make to public conversation. And similarly with regard to students, many things we can say, but certainly the most important aspect of academic freedom for students surely is not being penalized for disagreeing with their teachers.
Well,
yeah.
Also, teachers need to be protected for not being penalized for disagreeing with their students. That's
absolutely right, and I took that to be pretty clearly part of what I'd already said. But let me underscore it now. Absolutely, that's
yeah, and I think that in some settings that's more to be taken for granted. But in some places, the teacher really can't count on the support of at least some administrators. So that makes the teacher pretty vulnerable to
Agreed.
Those students who are unhappy for one reason or the other. Agreed. Okay, secular universities have academic freedom. Why should a Christian university have it?
Right. So the thing I really want to underscore that I hope is important for us as part of this conversation throughout the whole day is there are multiple reasons for institutions to establish, what would you say, ecologies of discourse in which expressive freedom is protected. And so unavoidably, that protection ends up being protection for particular people, for particular faculty members or staff members or students. But what I want to emphasize is that while there, certainly it's a good thing to, avoid heavy-handed meddling with people's autonomy, and I certainly don't want to underplay the importance of that. From an institutional perspective, what matters is that academic freedom is a way in which the institution fulfills its mission. It has to be a way, and this is about what the institution does. It's not about first and foremost, I think, about just protecting faculty members, important as that is, or protecting students on an individual basis, important as that is. But first and foremost, it's about fostering the growth of understanding and the quest for truth on the part of the institution, and then, and this is really important, the institution as a contributor to the wider, public community, the scholarly community, and for a Christian institution, its church community. That these are contributions. Academic freedom is there in order to enable the institution to contribute to these communities by participating in the process of sifting and winnowing truth claims. So there are other things that matter, but that I think is the most important thing. This is here for the benefit of church and society.
So the institution cannot fulfill its mission without a great deal of academic freedom. Do I have that right?
It seems to me that academic freedom is a safeguard for the institution's contributions to church and society, and that's really, I think, the single most important rationale here. Now, if you note the book, there are multiple things I want to say about why we ought to care about this, but I think this is the most central one.
What about West Point? What if Adventist leaders thought of their colleges as parallel to West Point, preparing people to do the work of the church, and just like West Point prepares people to do the work of our military? What kinds of academic freedom do you suppose there is at West Point?
So I don't know the answer to that question, and so speculating probably isn't very helpful. But I think if the question is what if, I would say either an institution that models itself on West Point thinks of itself as of course West Point does, an elite educational institution with important features of that, and including therefore a commitment to intellectual excellence that involves then focus not just on what goes on with students, but also contributions to the wider community. Or it sees the West Point analogy as a matter of just being kind of narrowly utilitarian and offering people professional preparation. I doubt very much that's what West Point does. I think that West Point employs philosophers and historians. It doesn't just employ people to teach military tactics, and of course it teaches these to, again, some of the most capable students around. So my own view is whether we're serving those students or we're serving the wider communities, we're able to do so most effectively with a conversation that's protected by safeguards for academic freedom. But in any event, I don't think it would be a good model to suppose that any Adventist institution was just there to prepare church employees or other professionals without recognizing its commitment to contributing to the wider church conversation and the wider public conversation. I think that's a crucial part.
Two things come to mind. Chris Christopherson was to be a professor of English literature, I think, at West Point, but went to Nashville and became a lyricist and wrote country music. Another thought I have is that we lived in Hawaii when I was a youngster, and my father had the greatest respect for people from West Point. There are lots of military people there, but my father was convinced that West Point graduates were really well-educated and very impressive people. And that goes along with your suggestion that they get an excellent education there, even though it's very focused. So, yeah.
Everybody, in effect, gets an engineering degree, whatever else one does there. I mean, that's the impression I get. So, of course, you can do a history degree at West Point, but you're, in effect, doing a double major in history and engineering, as well as a lot of course, military history and so forth. So I think it is very demanding, and parts of it are very practical. And clearly, the sort of person who wants to become a military officer is typically somebody who's probably fairly pragmatic and hard-headed and doesn't necessarily have time or energy for intellectual reflection, even though these are people who are often very smart. But then there are people who do have that kind of focus. They may be in the minority, but I think they are well served by an institution like West Point.
David?
Okay.
David?
Yes.
May I read something I just looked up on Google?
Yes.
In turn, West Point has made a mockery of its own academic freedom policy and lost the trust of many of its faculty. The West Point faculty model and its policies have been evolving since Congress mandated the inclusion of more civilian faculty members in the 1990s.
Huh. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that.
And that was written October 26th of last year.
What do you understand that to be saying?
Are you asking me?
Yeah. How about rereading it? Because I'm not quite sure I got it.
Okay, just a minute. In turn, West Point has made a mockery of its own academic freedom policy and lost the trust of many of its faculty. The West Point faculty model and its policies have been evolving since Congress mandated the inclusion of more civilian faculty members in the 1990s.
Okay, what I would take from that is that West Point indeed has had a considerable degree of academic freedom, but seems to have, in the eyes of some, been less successful in providing that academic freedom to people. In any case, what's important to me is that whether West Point is fulfilling that task now, it is the case that academic freedom is an important part of West Point's culture. So maybe they're living up to that standard, maybe they're not living up to that standard, but the standard is there. That's what I would take from that statement. Thank you for looking that up. It's interesting.
Sorry, I put the link in the chat for an article related to academic freedom at West Point. They actually have a committee for academic freedom, so clearly they're not excluded from that. But just as it happens in many other institutions, there are cases that question how serious people are at any institutions regarding academic freedom. And I think part of that lack of seriousness is probably in the fact that tenure has decreased from more than 90% to, I think it's now about maybe less than 20% in all US colleges and universities.
Yeah, and I think, what complicates matters further there at West Point, surely, and again, we don't want to kind of turn this into a, symposium about West Point, but I think what complicates things, as I understand it, is that at West Point in particular, even the people doing the kind of thing that Chris Christopherson would have done after, finishing his Rhodes Scholarship, those people are there for pretty limited periods. I mean, I don't think you're going to rotate through a period that I'm guessing is no more than 3 to 5 years. And so even if you're not dismissed or otherwise, formally sanctioned because you say something that somebody would prefer you not to say, my sense is just the kind of transient nature of the at least the military personnel who are faculty members there may complicate things a bit.
Dave, can I comment?
Yeah, let me just thank Simona for putting up this.
And notice Donna's had her hand up.
Okay, we've got some. Thank you, Simona, for that and the comment. Let's get back to tenure and what Simona said about tenure, because that's a very important thing, even more broadly than just tenure. But go ahead, Bob.
I was going to say that I worked with several West Point people who had left the military and joined USAID and State Department. And one of the things that came up, I remember for a while I was working with the Chief of Staff to Colin Powell, and he pointed out that a lot of the lessons that have been learned, and it's not just at West Point, but at the Naval Academy and also at the Air Force Academy, is that if you look back at the Vietnam generation, they felt that some of the mistakes that were made in the Vietnam period and in later years might not have happened if they had had more academic freedom and they had trained officers to be a little bit more open and thinking about shall we say, critical thinking, So I think I think Simona is probably suggesting, and I remember hearing this, is that there's a lot of debate going on in the military academies about the role of research and of thinking and of truth and all of that. And that's the same kind of debate I assume Gary is saying that needs to be done. Now, another analogy that you could throw in that I think it might be a problem, if you look at the so-called private military training institutes like Virginia Military Institute or others like that, then you're getting into, and maybe that's what you meant when you asked about West Point. Are you training people in an environment that's more indoctrination than it is truth and critical thinking? And that sometimes is a critique of those who go to these basically high school and college level, but are private institutions. And it caters to it produces a different kind of officer. And of course, some of them do go on to the military academies. Now, I can remember I spent 6 months studying with officers. I studied French at the Defense Military Institute in Monterey. And there was a lot of debate among the officers. These were all officers that I was learning French with, about the role of good education. And some of them came from the Naval War College and others from the Naval Institute there in Monterey. So this is very much an active debate, and I assume it's a lot of the same questions that Gary has been dealing with in his book.
But Bob, I'm just curious, when you say the chief of staff, was this Larry Wilkerson?
Yes. He's had a lot of course, he went on to be what he's now he was the chancellor of the University of Virginia. Well, no, and I can remember having several discussions with him because we were doing various projects with Colin Powell about the role of education of military people, and it was really, really very enlightening.
Interesting.
So Dave, I'm not sure if we want to go, I can manage question and answer. I was kind of waiting for later on, but Donna has her hand up if we want to be engaging in the Q&A.
Sure. If she has something to say right at this point, let's hear her.
All right, Donna, you're up.
Well, I was just thinking about the nature of academic freedom and institutions that are established by a particular group for a particular purpose, like seminaries, for instance, or military academies, but schools of music, other kinds of more focused after one's been through a more general education. Is unbridled academic freedom always a good thing? Or is the mission of an institution likely to be diluted or diluted or even lost if too many of the, say, faculty or students are spending a lot of time and focus on what might be called tangential issues. I don't know that I'm expressing myself extremely well, but I'm just suggesting we think a little bit about if there should be limits to academic freedom, and it might be a point at which someone finds it, the institution and the individual involved might find it beneficial for a separation in order not to completely undermine or lose the purpose for which the institution was originally established. That's all.
Well, that's a lot, and I'd like to jump on that and ask Gary a question about that, but is there someone else who wants to say something about this right now before we move forward?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to say there is no such thing as absolute freedom in academia. Even, even tenure does not protect a faculty from certain actions. So when we talk about academic freedom, it is the freedom within certain set of rules. So the idea that many people have that people can do anything or say anything or act in any way and still be protected is actually false. So academic freedom is freedom within certain limits, but the idea of academic freedom is that you can espouse and promote certain views without losing your job or, facing some kind of retaliation. So that is the point of academic freedom, that, you are free to say something that's controversial and not lose a job because of it. And I think it's part of the idea that we are protecting people who are educated and who are trailblazers in our society from retaliation from people who see things otherwise, and thus promoting this healthy discourse and ability to exchange ideas even when they are opposed in some ways to what majority may think.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Building on both of those two comments, Gary, maybe I can get back to your presentation in chapter 3, because it seems to me that it sort of in a singular way sets up the value of academic freedom from different angles, but doesn't take into account what Donna just said and what Simona just said, namely that the institution itself has some freedom, some discretion. And I guess my question is, why did you not set it up so that we're talking about a tension between institutional continuity on the one hand and intellectual integrity on the other hand, and that we're in this dialectic all the way through, back and forth, that can never be fully resolved, but must always be negotiated on a case-by-case basis, perhaps. But that's another issue, whether it should be case by case. But why set it up as though we have one consideration and we are more or less conforming to it, rather than setting up that we have these competing but equally important claims?
Well, I think sorry, hearing an echo there. Okay. Anyway, so I guess, look, there are a lot of different considerations that have been noted here, and I think the point I'd want to make is that, as I said at the beginning, probably what I want to emphasize here is that, again, academic freedom is not best seen primarily, though it may also be, a variety of other things secondarily. But as regards faculty members, a bit different as regards students, but as regards faculty members and staff members when they're functioning in the same way as faculty members, it's not best seen, again, as a matter of, integrity of the individual person, but precisely as an expression of the most crucial element of the institutional mission, it seems to me, which is the quest for truth. And so if the institution then is to fulfill that central element of its mission as a contributor to the ecology of expression, as I like to talk about it in my book on this topic, I think that ecology of expression is what the institution is contributing to by safeguarding academic freedom. It's contributing to the enhancement of the life of the church and the wider community. And so I don't think there's a matter of, as it were, treating the concern of the individual faculty member, the autonomy of the individual faculty member, as a kind of source of conflict with the institution, because while I think that autonomy matters, I don't think that's the central element here of the conversation. What's central here is the contribution that the institution as a whole makes to that wider conversation. And its ability to do that, I think, requires us to safeguard academic freedom. So I want to start looking at this from the institutional perspective and what I think is crucial for the institution to do. So that's not just a matter of how it might stimulate undergrads in an individual, liberal arts class, but the way in which it contributes to the conversation in the wider community.
Well, I think that's very, very important, because instead of setting it up as a sort of balancing act between institutional discretion and the faculty members' discretion, back and forth, as I understand it, you're setting this up as the institution's own primary goal, and the question is not whether it's in proper balance with something else, but whether it's fulfilling its own, its own mission.
I think that's how I'd like to put it.
I think that's a different way than I have thought about it, and I think that's a different way than maybe others have thought about it. So the question is, what are the institution's purposes? How does academic freedom fit into the institution's purpose? And to what degree is the institution living up to its own intentions here? That's helpful for me. Now I see other names coming up.
Yeah.
Monte, should we
Dave,
pressing forward, or should we let people jump in?
Dave, there's me, and then Peter, and then Donna. So my question follows straight from what you and Gary were just discussing. Gary, in your chapter, we're talking about the institution's purpose, but we're also talking about denominational universities. And so there's the institution of the university, and then there's also the institution of the church that you talk about. And in your chapter, you say that the Adventist University helps the Adventist community embrace and reassert its own commitment to truth. And it's that phrase, commitment to truth, that I'm interested in. In the next sentence, it's a new paragraph. You say it's not clear that any wider society has, unlike the church, a clear commitment to truth. So, and I was thinking about this, and my first response was, I don't see the church community as always have, especially our Seventh-day Adventist Church community, having a commitment to truth. But then I thought about that a bit more, and I thought, well, actually, I think we have as a church an unhealthy commitment to truth, because we often think that we have found the truth, or that we can find the truth. So I think we do have this whatever dysfunctional term you want to put onto it, of finding or having the truth. So then there's something else involved. I think there is a commitment to truth, but then, so why does that not work sometimes? And I think it has to do with what are the methods for discovering truth, and what is discoverable and what's not. So I'm hoping you can talk about that. And then we'll move on. Peter, I've got you next in the queue, and then Donna.
Sure. Thanks, Monte. I think that's very helpful and very blunt. I remember somebody quipping about Roy Branson, the eponym of this class, that the Adventism Roy articulates is like the the invention that somebody takes you into a little room to show you, that's so beautiful and works so well, but hasn't really been put into production yet. And maybe I'm doing just that. Maybe that should be said about what I'm saying in that paragraph. Monte, I think that's quite possible. That is, it seems to me that when I say that the church is committed to truth, I think we can see that as an implication of the conviction that there's God, that there is God's truth, and in the nature of the case, God, who is infinite and omniscient, is the repository of truth. We worship this God. We recognize always, therefore, the gap between our own ideas, our own experiences, our own convictions, and the truth with a capital T, which we, with our finitude and fallibility and sin, are never going to be able to somehow grasp in its entirety. And there's always, a kind of critical role that recognition of the reality of God and what God knows, as it were, plays in relation to our own limited understanding. And so we're always challenged to continue growing, continue trying to understand more fully. And I suppose, the idea that there really is there really is reality, right? There really is truth as an implication of an associate of belief in God was what I was trying to get at there. And yet I think you're absolutely right that grasping and acting on that implication is not always what we see in the life of the church. And I think that's, that's in the nature of the case. Human beings are like that. Human beings are attached in one way or another to beliefs that they experience as identity conferring and identity sustaining. And as a result, I think we often find it very hard to recognize the possibility that we might be in error. And, I think that a university system can absolutely play an important role, not the only role by any means, in fostering the kind of conversation within the church that serves as the serves as a crucial element in this ecology of discovery within the church to move past that. But I think you're absolutely right that it becomes very easy for us to forget that there's, in virtue of our belief in the infinite omniscient God, there's a tremendous gap between our own understanding and what's really the case. There's always room for growth, and that we need the kinds of institutions, the kinds of social dynamics that enable us to keep learning and keep discovering. And so I think you're exactly right, Monte, to point out the problem. And I think that, I'd like to believe recalling us to, I think a crucial implication of our fundamental belief in the reality of God ought to help there. On the other hand, I recognize again our own, human reality, and that absolutely includes all of us in this room, as well as some, people in Silver Spring, constantly means that we run up against the temptation to treat what we suppose as final.
Yeah, and Robert's put on chat a question about what happens when you learn things. I want to tap into that just a little bit, because I think one of the challenges that we have as universities and colleges is that there is a significant portion, maybe not a majority, I hope, but a significant portion of the Seventh-day Adventist Church that does have a fairly fundamentalist approach towards the Bible. So, for example, and I get to live with this regularly because much of my family is this way. So, for example, I like to look at the sky and look at planets and billions of stars, understanding that I can't see the billions of galaxies that are out there with my eye. I can maybe see one of them. Whereas I have family members who would say, "What are you talking about? That's a fantasy. What's out there is the firmament. All you have to do is look at the Bible, and we understand that those things aren't light years away. They're just right out there. That's very close. There's not this great outer space." Where do we find truth? We find it in the Bible. What the Bible tells us is adequate. And I think and so from that perspective, the university is not there to help us find truth. The university is a virus that needs to be fought against. I think that's a reality, and I've actually lived that in academia as well, not just with my family, but with administrators at times. So I don't know if you want to respond to that, and then Peter will come to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the story you've told, Monte, is a deeply troubling one, and I think, as I try to suggest in the chapter on community in this book, I want us to have communities on our campuses that make us that enable us to be engaged with and welcoming of people who take views that we might find very troubling, like the ones you've articulated. But I also think that we shouldn't underestimate the challenge that's involved in communicating there with folks who, as you put it so disturbingly and bluntly, think of the university as a virus, right? So it seems to me, what I'm trying to articulate in the book is an understanding of the Adventist higher educational experience that does begin as I try to suggest with the theological grounding in chapter 1, with an awareness of the reality of truth and the importance of truth as something that, always eludes our grasp. Precisely because we recognize that there really is truth that's independent of our perceptions and our judgments, we always recognize that we can't therefore equate our own convictions with the truth. We hope, get closer and closer to truth, but I think that's asymptotic. We're always running up against limits there. So how do we communicate with people who articulate the kinds of challenges that you've noted? So I don't think probably that, handing them this book is going to solve the problem, much as I wish, it were universally persuasive to everyone. I don't think that's probably the case. I do hope there can be an ongoing conversation about, what it means ultimately at a deep level before we get to anything else, what it means to believe in an infinite, omniscient God whose understanding is perfect and therefore poses a stark contrast to our own finitude, fallibility, and sin, and so that we recognize the reality of truth, we work toward truth at the same time as we recognize that that's an ongoing process. I hope that understanding that basic theological commitment can be helpful. I'm not holding my breath, obviously, with respect to any particular conflict we might have.
Thank you, Gary, and Peter, thank you for your patience. It is your turn in the queue.
In 1989, I spent a summer at West Point Military Academy.
Mm-hmm.
I taught American military history at Cal State University in San Bernardino. And I was sent there for a certification to teach American military history in any university in this country. It was a group of 25 professors throughout the United States. From what I observed there was that they were emphasizing Clausewitz, which was a Prussian military historian that was very strong on military discipline. And also the cadets were instructed into Napoleon's campaigns. Well, I believe, in short, that it's not a good comparison to put together the freedom in a university, academic freedom in university, Adventist University, and the West Point Military Academy. As I mentioned, it was emphasized the military discipline there. And let's say on the battlefield, if you receive orders, yes, in class, the students, the cadets were led to express their opinions. But on the battlefield, if you receive an order and you disobey it, you can be shot. Then we should not put together and make a comparison between freedom in an Adventist university and at West Point Military Academy.
You want to respond to that, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think there's a real difference between what happens partly in the military academies, but of course, especially in situations of combat and other high stress contexts in which military personnel find themselves, and what's going on in the context of a university and certainly the life of a church. So I don't have a burden to press the analogy. The analogy was, I thought, an interesting one that Dave put on the table about focus, and whether it was compatible with or in some interesting tension with the focus of an institution like West Point to also take academic freedom seriously. And so, I certainly would want to argue about that, right? I think one thing we know, it's one thing to say in the moment, in a battlefield situation, we obviously understand the importance of coordinated movement in a way that makes dissent often very risky. Now, obviously, sometimes I think we can imagine situations in which even there, we'd want to think that dissent made sense, right? If somebody orders war crimes, or somebody, clearly has just gone off the edge in one way or another. But I think we understand as a general matter why it's important to recognize that that's not a place for dissent as an ordinary matter. But I think we also have to recognize that, just as if we think about this from a kind of management perspective and the way in which organizations thrive, it's obviously very tempting for people, even quite tough, confident people of the sort who tend to become military officers. It's very tempting to go along to get along. And I think there is a culture of conformism that one certainly can read about and can understand as a real risk in the military, that people tend to get promoted because they don't rock the boat. And the end result can be, I think, sometimes, unfortunately, a lack of pushback against groupthink, that when the senior people in the room articulate their views, other people just go along, with the result that often we don't get the best input into decisions. And so it does seem like this is something that ought to matter at a place like West Point. In addition, obviously, there's the ongoing role, again, of the contributions that I think faculty members in particular make to conversations outside the institution. I think about a very interesting book that I keep returning to by a philosopher who spent quite a while teaching at West Point on meta ethics that I found very interesting, and certainly probably didn't make a major contribution to teaching at West Point, but it certainly enriched my life. In any event, I agree entirely that a church university and West Point aren't the same kind of place, and we certainly ought not to try to model the church on West Point or Annapolis.
Who's next, Monte?
All right, next up is Donna. We have Donna, and then I'm going to have Robert Ford. He put something in chat, but I think we should address that after Donna.
Okay.
I agree, by the way, about Bob Ford's question in chat, how we assimilate or how we deal with certain kinds of scientific truth, to use. He talks particularly about evolutionary biology, but there is a level of, there are levels of certainty, it seems to me, in different categories that we categorize as truthful. And if I jump off the top of a building, it is true and almost absolutely true that when I land on the sidewalk, I will splat. There are certain kinds of truth that are by and large unanswerable. And I think a lot of scientific truth falls into that category, although the good thing about scientific truth is it's always open to being disproved. And that's one of the strengths of the scientific endeavor. But I want to go back for a second. And Gary, you didn't send me this book, so I haven't read this one. And we weren't here last week. But on a larger level, it seems that there are certain kinds of freedom that actually destroy freedom itself. One of my favorite Supreme Court decisions is the Texas case in which Justice Scalia upheld the right to burn the American flag as a
Texas v. Johnson. Yeah.
Thank you. I knew you'd have the case name, because he's saying that the flag itself and the things it stands for actually provide you the freedom to burn it, and that is the kind of academic freedom that we are trying sometimes to impose on the university. If someone, however, comes along and says, you know what, universities are a bad idea, and this one in particular is a bad idea, and I urge you students take up your backpacks and leave, go somewhere else. This whole enterprise should fall. Or a school of music. Someone says, you know what, music is a waste of time. Spending your time studying and listening to these professors and these performances is utterly a waste of your life. Let's destroy the school and go somewhere else. Are you free to say? Yeah, you might be free to say that. But it would not be wrong either, I think, for the institution to come along and say, okay, obviously you're not in sync at all with the purpose of this school. You might say, I want to introduce a different kind of music. I think there are some things that have been kept out that we ought to consider, other kinds of performance that should be included. That's different from saying that music is itself utterly a waste of time. And I think that's where the church can say, if you really don't think the church itself has any purpose or any raison d'etre, then this is not the place for you. You can go somewhere else and stand on the street corner, or go somewhere else where people say churches themselves are a bad thing or an evil, and we shouldn't have them, and you shouldn't be here. But that is the kind of freedom that I think is problematic. And I think, was it Simone who said at the beginning, there are limits, there are certain actions that tenure will not protect you from. That's, to me, is one of them. When one challenges the very institution itself as something that ought not to be. That's all. It's a little bit of argument on the other side. Freedom, but constructive freedom, not destructive and chaotic freedom. That's it.
Yeah, so, it seems to me that, I guess, if the person who doesn't like a school of music is, leading riots that, involve destroying the instruments, or, is, attacking faculty members on their way to the choir, then it seems to me that's deeply destructive to the institution. On the other hand, for the institution to have to justify its existence is, I think, a very useful task, right? The institution needs to think about who it is, about what kind of institution it is, and to be able to explain that to those who are there, so that they're able to assess that. So I don't actually find that something that's counterproductive to the School of Music or to any other institution. Again, I think there's a difference between active disruption, which I think is a perfectly good reason to ask people to go away, and intellectual challenge, which I think can help the institution to frame better what sort of place it is and why it's there. So I do, of course, agree entirely with what Simona said, that tenure isn't some kind of automatic protection against all sorts of things. A tenure rule, as I try to highlight in the discussion of this in the book, a tenure rule is just the kind of protection any of us would want, I think, in any employment setting, namely that we can only be dismissed for cause. But the fact that there is cause is certainly not ever something that we can ignore. My own view is that cause is not, it's not a good cause to dismiss somebody because of the content of what that person says, but one can certainly imagine disruptive behavior for students or for faculty members that would absolutely be cause for dismissal.
Okay.
Let me just respond quickly to what Gary said. Ideas can be disruptive, and some ideas, I don't know, again, I forgot, it was Justice Holmes, I think, who said freedom of speech does not include the right to shout fire in a crowded theater. And there are words, not necessarily, not throwing a rock in the window, but standing outside the window and saying things that undermine the very existence of the institution, and cause danger, or cause even other people to do things that undermine or threaten the existence of the institution, which has given you the platform. That's to me a line that has to be drawn.
Well, I think what Donna is talking about is probably parallel to stochastic terrorism. You know, it's not the person who is actually pulling the trigger, it's the person who inspired the person pulling the trigger. And so there are situations when, at least in the United States, you know, you're allowed to say whatever you want without the government striking against you. But that doesn't mean that the private entity, the people who are hiring you, have to have the same view. So the consequences still exist, that we live in the world of consequences. And these consequences exist even in the world that is relatively protected, like academia.
Okay, Monte, anybody else?
Yes, we have Robert's comment, and I'm going to, so Robert's comment in chat was, what about academic freedom in a medical or dental school? And I want to put a little bit more of a specific twist on that. I think I know what what Bob is getting at there. For example, I teach in a professional program, and I teach a course on supervision. Well, it is, I don't believe, and so Gary can comment on this, hopefully. I'm assigned to teach supervision. It is not my prerogative under the guise of academic freedom to then say, I think rather than supervision, I will teach a course on whatever. I need to teach a course on supervision. So there are those limitations. I think that's maybe a bit of what has been talked about in a number of cases here. But then there's the whole issue of being able to pursue truth, learned truth within the context of what I am supposed to teach. So Gary, I think sometimes people will say, well, academic freedom is problematic because people just want to be able to teach whatever they want to teach. And they're setting up kind of a straw man argument there. Can you draw a line there of where that boundary is a little bit? You do some of that in your chapter. And Bob, if I'm misunderstanding what you mean by academic freedom in medical and dental school, what I'm taking there is you're talking about there are some curricular requirements and accreditation requirements, and those limit what we teach, or at least track it a little bit.
That's definitely part of it, and I think the curriculum issue is one that maybe Gary could comment. But I was also thinking, particularly in the case of Loma Linda, I remember back one of the key purposes of medical colleges, medical universities, is research. And what if someone wants to do research that really stretches the line on medical ethics and other kinds of things, and he says, for the greater good, I'm willing to do some things that kind of pushes the boundaries. I can remember the debates back when I was in graduate school at Loma Linda over baby Faye and some of the research that was done. And there was criticisms of those that were willing to do some things that seemed to be on the edge in terms of medical research, not just teaching, but research, because I think research, we haven't talked a lot about it, is one of the main missions of universities. It's the discovery of truth. And you have to be willing to sometimes push the boundaries. And maybe those boundaries are harder in a medical or dental school than they are in a biology or a regular science university, or I don't know. Where are the boundaries on different kinds of schools, particularly professional schools?
Yeah, so it seems to me that I'd have to stop and think a bit more about how to articulate the principled limits, but I certainly think that part of my contractual responsibilities as a faculty member in a professional school that is responding to reasonable external expectations with regard to accreditation. My contractual responsibilities obviously have to include taking those seriously, and whatever else I'm doing, if I'm not fulfilling those, then whether I'm teaching something else or showing up to class drunk or whatever, the point is I'm not fulfilling those responsibilities. And it's very reasonable, I think, for the institution to expect that I either change my behavior or find other employment if I'm not helping the institution in that way. So I think the curricular requirements that are rooted in accreditation, of course, I think we have to take seriously. I think that Bob's exactly right that universities rightly care about research, and that's something I've been trying to emphasize throughout in what I've been talking about, the way in which we make contributions to the wider public, the wider scholarly communities in which faculty members participate, and in the case of an institution like Loma Linda, the church community in which it's rooted. And I think it's the research the faculty members undertake, and certainly also their communication of that, perhaps in ways intended for lay audiences as well, that plays that crucial role. So I focus on research there. As regards what we learn and how we communicate it, again, I'd want to see whether we're in a medical school or a dental school or somewhere else. I'd certainly want to see things proceed in an untrammeled fashion, but that obviously doesn't mean that a faculty member is somehow entitled to ignore crucial moral constraints, right? So, I mean, if I am conducting research by vivisecting live humans, I think we ought to be deeply troubled by that. And I don't care how much I'm going to learn in virtue of that. I'm not entitled to be Dr. Mengele, right? And so obviously, the way you framed this, Bob, was with reference to, I think to ethical standards. And again, I'm always nervous sometimes about the use of the word ethics. I'm never sure what it means. And the way I use it as a professional in ethics is maybe different from the way some other people do. But in any case, moral requirements matter. And the institution is certainly free, it seems to me, when there are clear, moral violations involved in a research program it seems to me, to interfere with that. And, we can talk about what those specific things might be. And we got to, obviously that's one of the things that's under debate, and an institution might view that in different ways. But it is a case in which the institution is providing resources and providing compensation to people and so forth, and may have to decide one way or the other whether it's going to do that. That's not about penalizing people for what they say, but it may well be a matter of discontinuing any institutional support for what people are doing in some particular cases when those clearly fall outside moral bounds.
Okay, I think Rod is up, and then maybe we should take a break, Monte. What do you think?
Yeah, that sounds good. Do you want to do the break before or after Rodney? I don't want to miss Rodney.
I'm afraid we'll lose his thought if we take it later.
Yeah, I worry too. So let's do Rodney now, and then we'll do the break. I agree with that. We lost him last week. Rodney, are you available?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Look, I want to make a couple of comments and end with a question that in part has already been answered by Gary. And the background to my observations were as a Kellogg Fellow in the 1980s who elected to come to Loma Linda amongst many other choices of universities. And then some comments as an executive of Adventist Health and how one could be effectively shunned within an Adventist organization for continually bouncing off parameters, even if the parameters of the organization were not clearly written or articulated. We had this code. My first point is that when I chose to come to Loma Linda, I was very clear about its mission, its values, its vision, and its values. Mission, vision, values, less clear about its goals and the tactics, how things might play out. But Loma Linda never disappointed me. My year and a half at Loma Linda exceeded my expectations and became a great way to a further career. But I want to uphold the importance of the contract, the implicit contract between students, enrollees, and between employment. There is a contract, even if it's not signed and articulated well. But Loma Linda kept its contract with me in terms of its mission, vision, and values overall. Not in every instance, but overall it did. I was not disappointed. Now, my second thoughts really come from my time, 20 years at Adventist Health, which was an Adventist institution, as you know. I always understood there was freedom of thought. There's not freedom of mouth, and there's not freedom of behavior, and nor should there be, nor can there be in an effective organization. I employed many non-Adventists to represent an Adventist organization during that time. I did 2 or 3 things that I think made it work. I interviewed the applicants. I asked them very clearly, can they support the mission, the vision, and values of Adventist Health? I made them buy into that in a contractual sense. Didn't have to get them to sign anything, but I told them it's the only way that it's going to work. It's the only way that you can be happy here and me as your boss can be happy with you. I used expressions that we often used in Adventist Health is, if you carry the Adventist card, then you live and behave between the lines. And I would tell them what some of those parameters were. And overall, the suggestion was, don't ever embarrass the company. You will not proceed. You can only go backwards in your career. So don't embarrass the company. And if you find yourself pushing up against the parameters of the organization, is Adventists are very effective at shunning people. You will be moved to the margin. You'll become grumpy and unhappy. Adventist executives mightn't say much, but you won't choose a further career within Adventist Health because you are effectively frozen out. I've heard and sat beside executives in Adventist Health that we would listen to someone speak and they would lean across to me and say, this person is ending their career. They have nowhere to go after what they've said in the last 5 minutes. You see, tacitly within the Adventist organization, there is a code. You know, there's a code on speaking, there's a code on behavior, but it gets back in my vernacular to being a contract, even an unspoken contract. So in summary, I very much support clarity of purpose, mission, vision, and values, not necessarily goals and tactics. They will come through the experience. And once my non-Adventist employees bought into this, they were surprisingly supportive of Adventist Health. They became champions of Adventist Health. I have only 2 or 3 instances where I had to speak to somebody about their behavior, their conduct, or even their attitude. And so, Gary, if there is a question in here, it really is about the contract that exists in the enrollment of students, between students and faculty, and between employees and their employer, their Adventist employer. And so I did hear the word come up several times, contract, but it's a 2-way thing. And the clarity of that contract and its expectations is just critical. The institution cannot function and survive without that contract.
Yeah, so Rodney, your experience obviously is vastly richer and deeper than mine with respect to the kinds of settings you've talked about, and so I won't try to second guess you there at all. With respect to the higher educational environment, I'd certainly say, on the one hand, clarity is obviously a crucial means of reducing subsequent friction. I would just add that the kinds of things I've tried to say about academic freedom are intended to shape what that, to shape those institutional values that go into the definition of things from the institutional side, right? That's my, this is not a kind of post hoc concern with how we respond to a potentially difficult situation, but rather what I think I'm trying to argue for in the book is that we understand that the sorts of values that I'm urging in this book are ones that I hope will be clearly articulated from the beginning when students, when staff members, when faculty members are engaged with by the institution, because the institution itself has deeply embraced them.
David, you're muted.
Thank you. Let's take a break. And when we come back, amongst other things we might do, I'd like to share with the group some statements from some different groups. For instance, I have the statement on academic freedom from the Council of Christian Colleges and Universities. Be interesting to see what you think of that. I also have them from Loma University and from Southern University and from Andrews University. And there is some difference amongst those. So maybe we can take a look at that. I do think that I want to underline what Gary has said, and I didn't discern it as vividly as I should have when I read the chapter, and that is he's looking at academic freedom as part of the mission of the institution. So he's not so much looking at it from the faculty's point of view, who might feel oppressed or whatever, but he's looking at it from the institution's point of view and how important academic freedom is from the institution's point of view. Having said that, we've all said, though, there are some boundaries. And the documents I'd like to share, if we have time, talk about what those boundaries should be. So it's about 11:43 here in California. How about if we convene at 11:55? Would that work? That's about 12 minutes. Okay, nobody's saying anything, so I'll see you in 12 minutes.
All right, and I'm going to go on break, but I'll be back a bit before that to start developing the queue.
Okay, if anybody wants to speak, be sure to tell Monte. If there's a chance, I'd like to share some of these documents.
Yeah, you're first in the queue. So I am back and I am beginning to watch for hands. I don't see any at this moment, and I don't see any requests to get into the queue on chat yet, but I'm watching.
And Dave, just a comment. I hope you and Bronwen had a nice time off the last week. Wish you the best. Yeah.
We did. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
We went to the beach for my birthday.
Oh, that's great. I think I saw a picture of you feeding your face there on the beach. Yeah, so I hope you had a good time. Yeah.
We had a blissful time. Thank you.
You're welcome.
David, this is Rod. Is there is there a signature line on those terms, on that policy, or is it just a statement? And is there an arbitration clause in there? You're muted, Dave. I'm sorry, I started too early.
No, it's just a policy. Now okay, it's 11:55, so we should probably begin, but there is one that does have a sign-up sheet, we might call it, and we can talk about that in a minute.
Yes,
what
I
do
want
you
to
have,
know.
Monte?
Sorry.
Pardon, Dave, did you ask me a question?
Yeah, is it time to begin?
Yes, I have that it is time to begin, and sorry, I was letting you take that. It is time, and you are first in the queue, and currently I don't have anyone else in the queue.
Okay. I don't see Gary yet. Let's wait just a second.
Yeah, I don't see Gary either.
There he is.
Gary's with us.
There's Gary. Okay, Gary, do you want to say something before I look at these documents with you?
No, I don't think so, Dave. Thanks.
Okay, here's the collection. And I've tried to highlight, let me get going here. This first one is from the Council of Christian Colleges and Universities. So maybe I can just walk through this, see what you think. For CCCU institutions, limitations on academic freedom stem directly from their Christian identity. The Christian understands freedom to mean not freedom from all constraints, but rather freedom to love God and serve others wholeheartedly. For example, while the doctrine of creation provides theological grounding for academic freedom, the doctrine of human depravity supports limitations on that freedom. Christians believe that human beings are finite and fallible, limited in their understanding and subject to unknown or unacknowledged biases. Okay. Second, Christianity emphasizes the importance of living in community. This is an important emphasis in this document, the importance of being a responsible member of a vital community. Second, Christianity emphasizes the importance of living in community. Christian universities seek to resist the fragmentation that characterizes modern universities and function as true universities. Okay, thus, people voluntarily agree to live by shared values in their pursuit of truth, values that inevitably set limits on the exercise of academic freedom. Moving down, and here are the three ways it's suggested that institutions nurture academic freedom. CCCU academic leaders therefore nurture academic freedom through the application of three values. First, clarity. These institutions seek to articulate clearly any theological boundaries that stem from their institutional identity and to communicate those limitations to the faculty in the hiring process and ongoing evaluation processes. So one of the three important things is clarity. The other is charity. We desire to be communities characterized by Christian charity in all personal interactions. Thus, if a faculty member is accused of infidelity to the ideals or beliefs of the institution, leaders of the university community seek to handle the situation with charity and extend the benefit of the doubt to that professor. Then finally, process. Applying charity and patience also requires that university leaders follow clear processes and procedures for dealing with accusations, processes that include faculty peer review and a right to a fair hearing for the accused. Okay. While clarity, charity, and process govern the practice of academic freedom at these institutions, we readily acknowledge the gap between aspiration and reality. Academia consists of flawed individuals and thus imperfect institutions. Okay, that's that. Now, let's just drop down to Loma Linda and skip over the preambles and get right to the business of it. This is what it says at Loma Linda. Faculty members have full freedom to pursue study and research germane to their interests and that of their academic appointment, and to publish the results of their research. Faculty members are entitled to freedom in the classroom in discussing the subject they have been appointed to teach, but should avoid discussing controversial matters as an expert when unqualified. Faculty members are advised to consult with Loma Linda University Research Affairs and inform Loma Linda University Health Office of Advancement or of Presentation, Office of Advancement, of presentations or publications of results that may have an impact on the public perception of healthcare practices at Loma Linda. That meant for me, whenever I was asked by someone from the press to comment on this or that, I always said, please check with the Office of Public Affairs. If they approve it, I will. If they don't, I won't. When speaking as private citizens, faculty members must make every effort to state that they are not speaking as spokespersons of the university. Society expressed restraint and self-discipline from the faculty of a church-related university. Okay, that's from Loma Linda. Now, this is from Southern Adventist University. Again, bypassing the preamble and getting right down to the rules, the faculty member should see it as both a right and a duty to maintain a high level of personal integrity and professional competence. Second, it is the faculty member's responsibility to use the freedom of his or her office in an honest, persistent effort to search out and communicate truth. Okay. This is as true in matters of theology as elsewhere. At the same time, he or she must be open to the insights and corrective influences of the church he or she serves. This is a document that I have down below from the General Conference. The faculty member is entitled to freedom in the publication of his or her findings. Okay. The faculty member entitled to freedom in the classroom in presenting his or her subject should use care, however, in expressing personal views, discussing material not related to the subject taught, or dealing with topics for which he or she has no special training or competence. 5, the faculty member should be prepared both to support the right of his or her colleague to academic freedom. Okay. 6, she or he is expected to exercise due restraint and respect for the traditions of the university, community, and church. That notion of respect. That's what Loma Linda also says. People who are hired by Loma Linda need to respect the views and values of the church. They don't ask people to believe them, but only to respect them. Now, here is something I think is stronger than what we saw elsewhere. This is from Andrews. The religious character of the university provides a context for the responsible exercise of academic freedom. Subversion of or overt disharmony with the standards or teachings of the Seventh-day Adventist Church as contained in its statement of Fundamental Working Policy, Section 2, Faculty 44, beliefs are grounds for dismissal. None of the others really said that one had to comply with these fundamental beliefs of the church. The others said one has to respect them. And that, I think, is a difference. Okay, but here we get down to the rules: freedom to engage in research and publication. The teacher has full freedom to pursue study and research germane to his or her interests and to that of his or her academic appointment, and to publish the results of his or her research. Freedom in the classroom. The teacher is entitled to freedom in the classroom in discussing the subject she has been appointed to teach, but should avoid interjecting controversial and non-germane material. The teacher should also avoid discussing controversial matters as an expert when unqualified. Okay, as a citizen, when speaking as a private citizen in various publics, a faculty member must exercise appropriate restraint and indicate that he or she is not speaking as a spokesperson for the university. Okay, academic freedom does not extend, of course, to riot or to conduct or speech that destroys the ability of the university or a part of it to function. They do add, academic freedom allows a faculty member to question institutional plans, objectives, or policies. Now, okay, that's that. Let's see what else we might pick up here. This is the general conference statement. And let me back it up. Oh, what did I do? There we go. Pull this up. Again, this is from the general conference. Here, this is the crucial paragraph. But where shall the line be drawn between freedom and responsibility? An individual entering into employment with the church is expected to assume the privilege of representing God's cause in a responsible and honorable manner. He is expected to expound the word of God conscientiously and with Christian concern for the eternal welfare of the persons under his care. Such a privilege precludes the promotion of theological views contrary to the accepted position of the church. Should a worker violate this trust, the church must move to maintain its own character, inasmuch as the community of faith stands to be divided by the promulgation of divergent doctrinal views. The worker's privileges consequently stand in jeopardy. This is particularly so because the worker, being in the service of the church, is accountable for the preservation of its order and unity. Okay. In the interest of genuine progress in spiritual understanding, the church will arrange for a worker's divergent views, if he believes them to be new light, to be examined by a competent committee. Listening to alternatives will always advance truth. Either the alternative will strengthen and enlarge upon the truth, or it will stand exposed as false, thereby confirming present positions. Then they have these guidelines. Here we go. Private consultation between the chief executive officer and the worker. The review committee, its composition and its function. This is a committee set up to deal with this particular issue. Provision of appeal. Here we go into SDA higher education. Here's what the general conference says a professor has: freedom of speech. The teacher recognizes certain limits to expression of his personal views, freedom of research, freedom to teach. Here we go, right here. As a specialist within a particular discipline, he is entitled to freedom in the classroom to discuss his subject honestly. However, he will not introduce into his teaching controversial matters unrelated to his subject. Academic freedom is freedom to pursue knowledge and truth in the areas of the individual's specialty. It does not give license to express controversial opinions on subjects outside of that specialty, nor does it protect the individual from being held accountable for his teaching. The historic doctrinal position of the church has been defined by the General Conference in session and is published in the SDA Adventist Yearbook under the title of Fundamental Beliefs. It is expected that a teacher in one of the church's educational institutions will not teach as truth what is contrary to those fundamental truths. Will not teach as truth, but one could, I guess, advance an idea as a possible improvement of what we believe, but one should not teach it as a settled matter. Truth, they will remember, is not the only product of the crucible of controversy. Disruption also results. Okay, then clearly stated procedures and so forth. So those are some guidelines, first from the Council of Christian Colleges and Universities, and then from some different institutions around the Adventist world. Gary, do you have any comments first?
I think the only comment I'd want to make is in response to something that was said in the Council of Christian Colleges and Universities document, which talks about human depravity. I certainly think we ought to be very much aware of the penchant to behave badly. And I would just point out that that penchant is nowhere more evident or more dangerous than in the activities of people with power, and which presents a special temptation to bad behavior. So that it seems to me it's precisely in recognition of that temptation that we ought to minimize the discretion afforded to those with institutional power to suppress speech.
Interesting. So this really applies to the administrators and Board of Trustees as much as anybody else, maybe even more so. Okay. Monte, does anyone else want to say something?
Yeah, I have one. I've got two hands. First, we've got Rodney up and then Simona. So Rodney, you're on.
This document has plentiful use of words like must and should. They imply accountability. There should be some system to monitor and enforce that accountability. So they're using contract words and even legal words, but ending with guidelines, which is relatively soft. These statements that you've read are beautifully written out, seemingly quite clear, but because they're not binding, we just hope all you people will be good people and comply and understand what we mean. I didn't see any explicit example of what a breach was. I didn't see anything about dispute management or arbitration, although one of the documents did talk about, I think, arbitration. So this to me is lightly written. I understand guidelines, but you can't have guidelines and ask people and use words like must and should or always or some of those kind of strong words if you don't have a binding contract. And I don't see it without a signature line, without examples explicitly of what a breach constitutes, and without an arbitration clause, that this is going to be that useful. I think it's written in a way that from an oversight and enforcement point of view is very problematic.
Okay. You know, I'm worried about these requirements to submit to the current beliefs of the church, because I suspect that Uriah Smith would find that we are way far from what genuine Adventism is. Adventism has progressed quite a bit in several different directions from what people like Uriah Smith believed. And unless there's some possibility for that kind of development, I think we're in big, big trouble. That's why I like the language of respecting the 28 fundamentals rather than conforming to them. Monte.
All right, so next up we have Simona, and then just to let people know who's in the queue, we've got Simona, then Donna, then Peter. So Simona, you're up.
I can say I'm really happy I never worked at any church institutions, because I wouldn't like somebody to tell me what I'm allowed or not allowed or competent to speak about. I think that ability to contribute to discussion, even in items that I am not necessarily, an expert, quote unquote, well, even though I really hate that word because I find it difficult to have the arrogance to claim expertise in any field. But, as an educated person, I have the right, the ability, and probably even purpose to speak about things that matter, even if they're outside of my quote unquote expertise. And I think that part of university, of academic freedom, is exactly that brings people who have diverse points of view from different educational, experiential, beliefs and so on, other things that inform our opinions, to speak about these things and to speak freely and without fear of a retribution or rejection or, dismissal. And so all these documents that I have seen and the quotes that you have said, they're actually not talking about freedom. They're saying you are free to speak as long as you speak what we tell you or what we allow you, and that's not freedom. And so from my point of view, if somebody tells me, well, you're not an attorney, why are you discussing this Supreme Court decision? Well, I'm an informed citizen, and I have experience and I have education that allows me to, and ability to think critically, even on things that I am not necessarily, and again, quote unquote, expert. I'm going to just, one more thing that is separate. There was a dissident whose name I always forget, who said there are only two types of countries in the world: countries that have freedom of thought and countries that have freedom of speech, but never both. And there is some truth to that, to some extent at least, because in countries where you're not free to speak, nobody can tell you what to think. In countries where it's free to speak, there is so much media and other ways of controlling what people think that, sometimes the content of the speech is really poor. So I think it's important for us to speak about freedom in terms of what is true. What is the true sense of freedom? And what is this search for truth? I mean, if search for truth is limited by parameters somebody else tells me, then this is not search for truth. It is staying within the limits of something that's already accepted. And so I don't believe in dogma. I'm a scientist. I'm a physician and scientist. I don't believe in dogma in any respect, because I think that every opinion, even scientific opinion that currently we hold absolutely true, may later on we find out that we actually were wrong. When I was in medical school, we were talking about the DNA structure as something that was fixed. We now know that that's not the case. I mean, there are lots of things of that central dogma that is no longer dogmatic. And so I think it's important to understand what freedom is, that is number one. And two, that the freedom is not something that is limited to a very small scope of what I'm allowed to speak about.
Could I respond to that, Monte?
Sure.
Maybe I can nudge back just a little bit, Simona. Suppose you're teaching a course in pharmacology, and you come to class and you take the first 5 minutes explaining why you think President Biden's plan to rebuild our infrastructure is the wrong policy. I have a trouble with that for two reasons. One, it's off the topic. And two, the person who's a teacher is in a position of power and the students aren't able to respond. Now, I would feel better about it if the teacher said, this is my view and I'd like to hear your views as well. But if, you know, he or she expresses a view and then just starts in the lecture, it seems to me that person has taken some advantage of the relative powerlessness of the student. What do you think?
Well, you know, I'm going to counter. You are in a Christian college and the teacher comes and, you know, it's again, let's say a lecture in pharmacology, and they start talking against abortion because, you know, it is the central tenet of their religion. Is this off topic? So, you know, we are weighing things differently in Christian colleges versus, you know, other colleges, private or public. Here's the thing, academic freedom is not limited to what you teach in class. It is not limited to what you teach in class. You are expected, when you're in class, you're expected to have a curriculum and you're expected to follow it. Doesn't mean that if there is a reason to spark a discussion, you couldn't go off topic to bring it back maybe to something that's germane to what you're trying to teach. So I can't tell you just based on what you said, is it right or is it not right, because the context matters.
Okay, fair enough. Over to you, Monte.
All right, next up we have Donna. Let's see, Donna is up. Donna is still muted.
Now I think I got it.
There we are.
Wait. Well, Simona has said a lot of very interesting things. I would point out, I have a foot in a couple of professional camps, and I have found that each people in each of those camps who imagine themselves as authorities are often find themselves free to make absolutist statements about other things. Perhaps physicians are the most frequent violators of their professional boundaries. In churches, often, well, someone has an MD, so they feel qualified to make pronouncements about theology or some other area. And that may be a particular trap for Adventists and Adventist institutions. I think it's a problem at an Adventist, particularly an undergraduate institution, when a student is taking biology class and also one of the required Bible classes, for instance. And in one class, the Bible teacher teaches traditional Adventist theology or religious belief and quotes Mrs. White and says the earth is 6,000 years old, and makes a statement of that sort when talking about creation. Creation, of course, is an important doctrine, a religious doctrine, and about that he or she has the right, I think, or the duty even to present alternative views. But over in biology class or geology class, the professor might go through the layers, geologic layers, and estimate time fragments and say something completely different. What does the student do? He says, well, no, you know, in Bible class, Professor A said this, and now I'm in biology class or geology class, and Professor B says this. So the student then is left with these two different points of view. And I think that's more of a problem in our schools than, and maybe in a Baptist college or some other strongly religious institution, and as opposed to someplace where different points of view are more easily expressed and people are used to living with uncertainty. We're not very good at living with uncertainty, I think, or we have not been. I think we're changing. We are evolving. We have evolving standards of decency. We have evolving standards of understanding. I wanted to say one thing in response to Simona. I think expertise is not a bad word. And I think expertise is relative. That is, if one has spent years, for instance, in studying a branch of science or science, often that person's comments or opinions are more valuable than those of someone from another branch of learning. Let's say, not that the other person is not an intelligent person and understanding, but if you don't have the basics, if you haven't learned what is already known, then it's difficult I think, for you to speak authoritatively on new information as it comes, because you have to compare and contrast and understand what moving forward means in a particular area. So I would say maybe expertise sounds too absolute. It's not absolute, it's always fluid. One always learns more in certain areas. So isn't that correct? And does anybody else see more of a problem in Adventist institutions than in other places?
Yeah, thank you, Donna. I'm not against expertise. I'm just, I think that sometimes we use that the word expert very freely, because I have heard many people who are considered experts in the field, and they speak completely without any understanding what they are saying.
Yeah, that's a big problem. Gary, do you want to say something about this?
Just a couple of things I want to say. So I think it would be self-deluded for any of us to imagine that expertise of one kind or another doesn't matter, right? That people who have spent a great deal of time and intellectual effort trying to dive into and to contribute to a given intellectual discipline don't have something very valuable to say that's worth paying attention to. I would just make two kinds of observations there. The first is just that that's a principle that I think as audience members, as people consuming information, we certainly have good reason to be attentive to. And but I would just emphasize that that's the way I'd want that to play out, right? As a matter of how the audience receives and processes the information, rather than as a matter of how the institution tries to shape who says what or who is able to speak. It should be, I think, a matter of how the audience proceeds. The other thing, of course, is that it can be very tempting. We talk about this issue of how people, step outside their areas of expertise. I think a very subtle kind of issue that doesn't always get the attention that it deserves is the way in which you can be an expert in a given area without it being the case that you have anything particularly, distinctively expert to say about some very nearby, adjoining area. Right. So to think about an example from, the past from, several decades ago, Albert Einstein, as a brilliant theoretical physicist, certainly had something to say about the viability of building atomic bombs. That didn't, however, give him any particular expertise when it came to writing to the president and saying we ought to build an atomic bomb, as he did, and subsequently, regretted having done. That is, the policy applications, the ethics and the economics, if you will, are not areas in which the scientific expertise equips you to say anything with particular impressiveness. I mean, you certainly have every right to speak, as Einstein did there, but it's just important to remember the distinction between understanding the science and having some expertise regarding its application. And that would be true in other disciplines we could think of. The other thing I wanted to say, it just occurs to me with regard to Donna's, I think, interesting example about different classroom contents. I used to take the time in a class that I continued to teach, but I don't know that I've made this speech in the same way more recently. This was a class looking at issues related to global poverty. Students would read books by serious economists with quite different perspectives. And I would say, so you certainly ought to understand what this person says and that person says, but part of the kind of metacognition that's going on in the class, the second order learning that's happening, is learning to be aware of the distinctions and to look critically at what people are saying, not assuming that because this is a textbook, therefore it's like an elementary school textbook that just presents some facts that you're supposed to take as written. And I think part of the meta lesson I hope students can take in the case of different perspectives they might get in the imagined biology class and Old Testament class, would be precisely that I have to learn how to think through this problem. So I think Donna's right that we haven't perhaps been as good as we might have been at helping people do that. And I think that's something that deserves more attention. I would just say that that's a crucial part of learning, it seems to me, how to come to grips with different ideas, we recognize that different people who are authorities say different things, and our job is not simply to accept what they're passing on to us as things that should be accepted uncritically, but rather that this is an opportunity for us to learn how to think through this issue more carefully.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, when I'm not against expertise, quite the opposite. I would prefer that I have a trained surgeon operate on me versus somebody who, is working in a butcher shop. But I think that, there is a point where expertise needs to be met with humility and ability to recognize that we don't know everything. Just because we are well versed in certain area of science or technology or politics or anything else, that our views and knowledge that we currently have is not end all and be all of truth.
All right. Go ahead. Donna.
I agree with that, but and with what Gary has said, but I still think there is a level of education at which it is necessary to learn the basics. People may come, for instance, you hear now in certain areas of critical race theory, the suggestion that the emphasis on getting the right answer in algebra is evidence of white supremacy, let's say. Well, I don't think that's evidence of supremacy or inferiority one way or the other. It's just that this is the nature of mathematics, and one needs to learn certain basics of mathematics in order to be able to intelligently use it as a tool in other areas or to become a mathematician. So to suggest that, well, this idea that 2 and 2 must always make 4, it's true there could be some very sophisticated discussion perhaps about that, but those are certain basic things that have to be learned in any field before one goes on to make pronouncements challenging them. I think if you don't know what's already there, then you really are just blowing air otherwise.
All right, thank you, Donna. And I want to bring Julius back in just a moment to his thoughts to remind us that the idea about math being related to race, math conclusions, is not about race. Critical race doesn't have anything to do with critical race theory. It may have to do with some other theories, but that's not what critical race theory asserts. We've got Peter up and then Bob Ford.
I believe that the statements that they've read for us, they are not accidental. rather, in my view, they are in response to the tendency that exists not only in the academic circles, but in general in the American society today to suppress free speech. And I will give a few examples. You recall how the students to UC Berkeley a few years ago, they were shouting, demonstrating, ho, 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 the Western Sea has to go. And how I think also at UC Berkeley, they reacted when a conservative speaker was invited to speech, to give a speech there. They were burning and destroying university property. And in lieu of these things, I was wondering, not only, I mean, putting up academic statements, but in practical way, what do you think, Gary, that should be done to resist this? Because this is not suppressing the free speech, but I think it's a mortal danger for democracy, for the society in which we are living. Because if we're not free to express what we think, that's the death of liberty, of democracy. And then do you think that there is also a kind of resurgence of ideology in the American society today?
Okay, I'm going to interrupt just a minute. Hang on to Peter's question. Do you think ideology is rising in America today? But let me just say this. We are formally out of time, and therefore, whatever we do from here on out is extra time. And we want to thank Dr. Chartier for being with us, and I'm sure he has other things he has to move on to. And so we'll continue the discussion as long as we want, but we don't expect him to stay by because he has a full day elsewise. Thank you, Gary, very much. We appreciate it. Stay as long as you want, but leave as soon as you do.
Well, it's always a pleasure to be here. I will, I think, leave, if it's okay, after responding to Peter, but I don't want to just leave Peter's question, which was directed at me, and
yes,
leave that hanging. So I guess I think that it is quite striking, right, that an institution like Berkeley, home, of course, to the free speech movement in the 60s, might indeed, be home to a climate that might be inhospitable to engagement. I think that, the University of Chicago statement that Dave circulated really is one very powerful way of emphasizing the importance to universities, for the mission of universities, to be open to exchanges that may indeed in many ways be provocative and indeed sometimes deeply unpleasant. That's just the way university life, I think, works. So I'm not in a position to comment, Peter, on the specifics of many different things that are happening at American campuses, but I would just say that it is absolutely the case that students, faculty members, community members shouldn't be penalized for the content of what they say, but when what they say is said in a manner that is disruptive of academic processes, when people are, for instance, shouting down speakers or making it impossible for those who are attempting to attend a talk to do so. I think we ought to be deeply troubled by that, and that certainly seems to be an appropriate context for institutional discipline. I think we need to have an environment in which it's okay to communicate on campus, in which academic freedom is consistently affirmed. It seems to me that that absolutely means that you can't have disruptive behavior. In terms of ideology across the American political spectrum, I think what's complicated there is that among elites, that is to say, it seems to me among people let's say, in senior positions in the executive and legislative and judicial branches of the federal government, and in the media outlets that, kind of major media outlets. The irony, I think, is that in general, rather than seeing a kind of increase in ideology, what we see, in fact, is a dramatic diminution of the range of acceptable opinion. And we see this nowhere more clearly, I think, than with respect to issues of war and peace. And you think about, I won't offer examples because I think that just unduly politicizes our conversation here. But I think that's really a profound issue. I think hyper-partisanship is very much part of what's going on in that world. But the irony is that the partisanship, in large part, is making more and more out of less and less. Now, in terms of what's going on in the, kind of at the grassroots, that's more complicated. And I do think that, maybe we do see the rise of certain ideological positions that really had been off the table for a while. And that deserves more conversation. And some of that certainly is troubling. But the thing that I do think is striking is that opinion makers actually seem to be much more interested in partisanship and in making a great deal out of differences that sometimes to folks elsewhere in the world and to folks on the receiving end of policies might seem surprisingly minimal. So, anyway.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gary.
Okay.
We will continue in 2 or 3 weeks, I think. Thank you.
Could I just comment something regarding this? Just want to say,
Simona, I do want to say, I want to hear what you have to say. I know we're out of the official thing here, but Bob Ford is in the queue.
yeah, no problem.
So
Sorry.
I'm putting you on the queue after Bob.
Well, my question, I was wanting to ask something to Gary, and he's gone now. The main issue, Dave, I wanted to come back to some of those statements that you read about the church policy. And I was going to ask Gary if an Adventist university can truly set an environment, a vision, and a goal that allows discovery of truth, not just promulgating of truth. Because it seems to me, and I agree with Simona, that I think those statements that you read are basically saying you can teach, but you can only teach if it supports the doctrines and fundamental beliefs of the church. If that's what's going on, and if you're not allowed to, in a good way, to explore and to learn and to discover truth, then what are we about? I mean, our church, it seems like you said, if we look at the way the church was in 1866 versus the way it is today, we've evolved a lot. So there's some discovery has been going along, some evolution in truth. So are we saying that the Adventist University can't be part of that evolution and learning of truth? I'm just sorry, too bad that Gary isn't here to discover it. I'm a little bit concerned that maybe we're trying to hobble our institutions to not really be part of the game, not the game, but of the process of discovering truth. Just a comment.
Could I respond a little bit, Bob? Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd like to hear what you have to say, because you're in a theological department. I assume that all of your colleagues are trying to discover what the truth of ethics, of religion, of is, and I hope that you feel that you are able to do that. I would worry if we lose the ability to do that.
Yeah, Dave, come on in and we'll include Simone in the discussion, but if you can respond to Bob.
Okay, I think there are different responses to that issue in these documents. And it wasn't really till we got to Andrews that the 28 fundamental beliefs were mentioned. Even at Southern, there's talk about respecting the heritage of the community, and at Loma Linda, one is expected to respect the church. And I think that and what the church teaches. I think that that's reasonable. I sometimes think it's not the non-Adventists, but the Adventists who are disrespectful toward some of the convictions of the church. So I think respect is there. I think Rodney's point about not embarrassing your administrators is a very important point. No administrator wants to be called in the middle of the night and be told, do you know what Professor so-and-so said? And then the administrator has to say, no, I don't. That puts the administrator in a tough spot. So if I'm going, it was my practice, if I was going to say something really controversial, I tried to let my administrator know in advance, so he would have some kind of response ready. Now, more philosophically, I think the more specific and concrete in particular the issue is, how much does this rat weigh, right? Something really down there and even further down, the more freedom one has. The more one goes up the level of generality and starts talking about big world views, that's where you start to get into more trouble. But the kind of bench work scientific people on our campus do, I think, is not hindered at all, as far as I know, by the church.
Yeah, and the questions, and then maybe it's because of me being involved in the earth sciences. We all know of colleagues that got in trouble because they strayed from church doctrine when it came to the age of the earth or geology or biological evolution or DNA or things like that. And, there's always ways of, and sometimes the problems are not so much because of the question or the issue, it's because of, shall we say, the way people discuss things. And if people let their feelings or their behavior sometimes is more of a problem than the actual issue in question. So there are ways of expressing and talking about controversial issues and doing it in a nice way, as you say, and being thoughtful and careful and so on. And there are ways of doing it that causes a rumpus in an institution. So I know, and we know of people that have suffered, and usually the problems are on both sides. Maybe the administrators that come down too harsh, and then of maybe faculty members that weren't very careful or judicious about expressing their views. So it's
well, my view,
yeah.
I'm sorry, my view is that set of issues has not been well handled, primarily because of the people in schools other than religion. That is, they have given themselves expertise in theological matters when we don't give them any trouble in their areas of expertise. So that there has been some real boundary crossing that is not appropriate, and it has caused trouble. And no matter how nice one is, if people are crossing boundaries of specialty and acting authoritatively in a field that is not their own, we have a big trouble.
I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you on that. So, how a dispute is carried out and dealt with is often more of a problem than the actual question that's being disputed. And it gets back to human feelings and human behavior and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, can we bring Simone in? Simone, and then Rodney's got his hand up as well.
I just want to, yes, thank you. So I want to comment on something. Just the fact that we are free to express our thoughts doesn't mean we need to give podium where people who are, for example, bringing hatred and, similar kinds of attitudes to fore. For example, we have a very, very loud group of people who are frankly having no problem bringing fascism back. And so they're free to think whatever they want and even say, it doesn't mean we need to give them the podium. And from that point of view, I think that people who live, who are in institutions like where I am, for example, which is one of the top public universities in the United States, you know, when we tell people, okay, this is not the ideology that is worth spending time on and giving podium in public, then maybe people should listen to that. So I think that, you know, there is a little bit of judgment call sometimes. You know, just because somebody is free to speak doesn't mean that, you know, we need to give them power to influence many others when the views that they are espousing are destructive. So that's just what I want to say. And I thought that Ruth actually tried to raise her hand before. So
yeah, so I've got Rodney and then I've got Ruth in the queue. So Rodney, you're on.
Yes, I just want to endorse what Bob Ford and you said, Dave. I'm one who believes that explicitness protects us all. And the evidence that explicitness has not been well established with employees, researchers or otherwise, is the amount of Adventists with hurt feelings that are out there. They're very easy to find, very bright, talented people who've contributed in many ways to organizations. And when you ask them why they've disengaged, it's hurt feelings. What was the basis of those hurt feelings? They had a conflict with an administrator or an administration. Why did that conflict happen? Was the boundaries weren't that clear and may have been arbitrarily applied, or the person thought, maybe I can push the boundaries a little bit because that's my nature. You know, I believe in change. I believe in freedom of speech. I'm going to push it, only to find out that they got pushed back, which means your expectations of the institution were the problem. You know, manage your expectations. The seeds of our disappointments in life are found in our expectations. Institutions can do certain things well, and they can't do other things well. Institutions don't have feelings. Humans have feelings. But I get back to the point of my point being, when you're explicit about what the deal is, what the contract is, it protects everybody, and it doesn't compromise freedom. If you want to be absolutely freedom, you can't work for the Adventist Church. I'm sorry. You know, do it in your own time or do it somewhere else. We are a constrained organization. And that goes with the territory. When you sign on, that's what you're signing on to. It can be a wonderful journey. It doesn't need to be pushed and pushed and pushed around when it can't adapt as quickly as what we as researchers can find out. I'm on a discovery tour. I think everybody in here is on a discovery tour, but we need to be cautious on how we expect the organization, the corporate organization, to adapt and respond. Its time frame and its ability is not our own.
All right, thank you, Rodney. We've got Ruth.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Ruth.
Okay, all right. It's been about 30 years almost ago that I was on the General Conference Executive Committee. And so I had an opportunity to attend various and sundry meetings, of course, in that capacity. There was a time when there was a committee had put together a mission statement to come to the committee to be approved. At that time, there were some of us who felt that it was not well done. And so we made some points to complain about some of the things that we felt needed to be addressed. At that time, the chair decided that what needed to happen was that we'd go back to committee. So those of us who had been unhappy went up with them to the committee. And the person in charge, who was well known and so forth, but I won't mention names, said that how could they the committee, after many, many, many months and hours of working together with the committee, as far as the statement, the mission statement was concerned, how we could come and think that in an hour or so, we could add anything significant or make a change or do anything useful if after all the effort that they had been putting into this job. Well, some of us, and I was one of them who spoke up. Actually, I had been a member of the Green Lake Church recently at that time, doing a mission statement with some very competent people. And I had a chance to hear them talk, and I was impressed with them too. And so I mentioned some of the things that I thought were a problem. The statement that they were using was simply a statement of the mission statement, was primarily a list of all the church's beliefs as far as it was concerned. It mentioned nothing about any other aspect that the church was involved in any way, shape, or form. Nothing to do with our health and our education and our outreach. None of these things were even implied that those were things that needed to be even addressed. Well, we did have a chance to make a difference. And eventually, some things were changed a little bit so that it was not just a list of the doctrines, and that some of the other things did get to be included in the activities. So sometimes people who, like myself, could speak up, even though we weren't really intelligent in that level as far as they were concerned, even though I did have a PhD, that sometimes it's useful to speak up, even if you are a woman, and even if you aren't part of a long-term lot of people doing something.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you very much for sharing that. And it pains me to hear about your experience, and also it sounds, and I'm afraid to say I'm not surprised that you ran into some sexism in your role there as well.
Actually, many people were absolutely wonderful people, and I had a great experience during the time I was on the General Conference Committee.
Wonderful. Donna, you are up. Donna.
It takes me, I'm not as technologically efficient as my husband, who knows where to put his finger on the phone to unmute. Ruth, I just want to say one little thing in response to what you said. It was important for you to speak up, and women to speak up, not even if you are a woman, but because you are a woman and can bring, I'm sorry, but you can bring a lens. I too am old enough to have faced some sexism certainly in medicine. And there was a surgeon here who used to love to say, women have no place in medicine. Famous surgeon whose name I will withhold. He has passed on, however, and he's not here anymore. So one of my female classmates did take issue against him in the dean's office, and he stopped saying that. But I want to go back to something Simona said. I'm concerned that toxic labels are sometimes used to shut down other people's views. And so we say so-and-so is a fascist, or because they express something that we disagree with. That sort of thing, I think, happened to Amy Bass, who, as some of you will remember, is a law professor, I think at University of UPenn, wrote an op-ed I saw it in the Wall Street Journal, and now that may reinforce your idea of the label. But she said, there are some values that we need to stress. We need to suggest that to our young people that they get married before they have children, that they finish their education, get a job before they go on to reproduce, that they value hard work, and that they understand that the rewards of hard work in whatever field you're in are there for everyone. And so she was touting the value of some fairly traditional points of view, and she was crucified by her colleagues and by the students at her university for saying such things like that, labeled fascist, racist, a variety of other things. And unfortunately, take a label, categorize someone, and then discount the value of anything and everything they say. And that, I think, there's a new religion now. And if you disagree with any of the tenets of this new public progressive religion, then a person can be labeled. And the label serves as a complete closing of the mind and of the door to the platform of speech against that person. And that I think is a real problem now.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about labels. I'm talking about bona fide, something that fits the definition of fascism, which is something that people who are historians and who are experts in the field are very well versed at. And so, we have a variety of views from conservative to liberal, and listening to a variety of views is okay. I mean, I have no problem with that, but there are things that we historically know are not good for the society. One of which is, for example, anti-Semitism. We know that it's not good. We know that racism is not good for society because we have seen the fruits of that. And so even though there are always going to be people who are going to espouse such extremist views, then doesn't mean that we need to give them podium to speak and indoctrinate others. And so I think that in this respect, for example, I think Europe has a little bit better view on certain things that we have here in the United States, where every single person who can get their hold on YouTube can sprout whatever they want without almost any consequences. And yet we live with the consequences. We are held hostage today by people who are against our right to live, to survive this pandemic, for example, which is, just one of the basic things that I think society should have the right to control, is to protect the society as a whole. And so there are lots of issues that we can discuss with. When I'm not putting labels on something, I'm saying, there are certain views that are dangerous. You wouldn't put bin Laden to go while he was alive to come and speak at the university and give him podium and probably draw thousands of people to talk about his idea, what America stands for. I mean, I'm taking an extreme just to point out that, I'm not talking about labels, I'm talking about dangerous ideologies that we historically know are not good and we should not promote.
Well, I would say that I think we should have allowed, it might have been better to have bin Laden come and speak and present his views and subject them to criticism, and that maybe he wouldn't have felt driven to blow up buildings. For instance, one story that stuck out a few years ago, you remembered Charles Murray, who wrote a book called The Bell Curve, and he was invited to speak in New England at a famous school. And eventually he was disinvited. And I think that was a mistake. He needed to have his research presented and subjected to criticism. Eventually it was, but it was almost vicious in the way in which people reacted and said, he's presenting information that we don't want to hear. It's just, you know, from the ground, we're not going to listen to what this man has said. Better to look at his research and point out where he's wrong and perhaps change him, but at least let other people understand and the basis for criticism of what he's done. I'm not defending Charles Murray. I'm just saying that the inability to listen to people with whose views we, you know, I disagree absolutely with everything you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And I think when you begin to say so-and-so can't speak because their views are anathema, that's a very Catholic position.
Yeah, but we're not saying they can't speak. We're saying I'm not giving you the podium to indoctrinate, and there is a big difference. You know, I don't want to have somebody like Hitler to have a podium like he had in late 20s and 30s, because we know where how far it went. In the society in which we live, in the world in which we live, there is certain percentage of people who are going to be attracted to extremist views and who are going to act on it. And so I think that we are becoming very lax as a society, and we are not protecting the freedoms to life and liberty of all our constituents, because we are giving podiums to people who really should not be there.
Okay, Dave, I want to jump in here and just say that I was at the end of my queue and now there's a queue that's getting very long. I need to leave. I see that Ruth was kind of the one with their hand up next, and we've got McKinney and Peters, but maybe this is the time to let it go free form and to end the recording. But I'll let you manage that, but I'm going to stop managing the queue. Oh, you're muted. Still muted.
I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to say goodbye also. I'd like to have lunch sometime with Simona and Ruth.
Thanks, Monte.
Dave.
Okay, here's the benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Monte. Am I recognized?